enigmatic personalities behind the initial Dulce base rumors. When it comes to the Dulce base topic, it's really not about the base itself, since apparently and evidence-wise so far, it does not seem to exist, but rather about the various personalities that have initially promoted this myth. Let's examine some of the enigmatic personalities, how it all started from around 1979 to 1983, and so on, and how ultimately deluded con artist Phil Schneider took advantage of the Dulce base myth. Let's talk about Paul Benowitz first. He was the owner of Thunder Scientific Corporation, which was a contractor to Kirtland Air Force Base, located right next to the entrance of Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and presently operated by his sons. From around 1979, Paul Benowitz began to witness some strange lights hovering over Manzano underground nuclear storage area, not too far from his residence in the Four Hills area of Albuquerque. Some researchers, such as Greg Bishop, theorized that he was looking at some tests of Project Starfire, which was a laser-based optical tracking system being developed at that time by Sandia Laboratories right next to the Manzano base. Paul Benowitz later became convinced that those objects were somehow related to an underground base in northern New Mexico near Dulce, a suggestion seemingly pushed then by a Richard C. Doty of AFOSI at Kirtland Air Force Base. Paul Benowitz began to suffer from paranoia and was later institutionalized. He passed away in 2003. His remains are buried in Veterans Cemetery in Santa Fe, and Paul Benowitz's sons refused to be interviewed. The main reason being that Thunder Scientific Corporation still does business with Kirtland Air Force Base. Let's talk about Myrna Hansen. In 1980, she claimed to have been abducted near Cimarron, New Mexico, and claimed to have been taken to an unknown underground location. She was at that time a resident of Eagle Nest, New Mexico. Paul Benowitz interviewed her at his house, together with Leo Sprinkle, who did a hypnotic regression. Paul Benowitz later on decided that she must have been taken into the Dulce base. This was allegedly only after Benowitz began to suspect that there was a base in Dulce. Now, let's talk about Tom Adams. Tom Adams was investigating cattle mutilations in the late 1970s. Tom Adams first heard about the Dulce base from reading Paul Benowitz's article in the newspaper and other sources from around 1981. It is alleged that Tom Adams knew Ann West. Now, who was Ann West? Her true identity was not initially confirmed, although it was Tal Levesque who claimed that she had been on Facebook with a different name, Cherry Hinkle, who claimed that her half-alien cat has lived for 29 years. She was said to have been an acquaintance of Tom Adams. Ann West, or Cherry Hinkle, claimed to have drawn the initial pictures of the vats of the Dulce base in 1987, yet claimed to have never heard of Paul Benowitz before. She allegedly knew Tal Levesque. She also claimed to have known a Thomas Edwin Costello. Tal Levesque claims that she visited him and his wife, and also Tom Edwin Costello in Santa Fe. Tal Levesque claims that Ann West is dangerous and is part of the invisible government. However, Levesque claimed that Ann West is part of the invisible government sure sounds like lunacy. Now let's talk about John Lear. Lear heard about Dulce allegedly from Ann West. Lear befriended Tal through John Grace, also known as Val Valerian. According to Tal West, John Lear retouched the Dulce drawings of Ann West that he received in 1987. Lear first came up with this hypothesis in 1988 about Dulce and also about Area 51. John Lear has never been taken seriously by the UFO community. Now let's talk about the enigmatic Jason Bishop. Tal Vesk, also known as Jason Bishop or Tal. His name really is Thomas Allen Levesque. Levesque in French means the bishop. Tal Levesque claimed that he worked in Santa Fe as a security person for a private company around 1980 or 1981. He claimed to have begun contact with Thomas E. Costello, who Tal Levesque claims worked in the same company in Santa Fe. Thomas E. Costello allegedly revealed his secrets to Tal. The secret was that there was an underground U.S. alien biolab under Archuleta Mesa, right next to Dulce, and that he had worked as a security person at that facility. But before coming with his Thomas Edwin Costello story, Tal Levesque also seemed to have heard initially about the Dulce base rumors from reading about Paul Benowitz. Tal Levesque claimed that he was visited by a tall reptoid at his home in Santa Fe in 1979. He currently lives in Mariposa, California. It was Jason Bishop, or Tal Levesque, who originally came out with the so-called Underground Tunnel Systems map with Dulce, New Mexico as its central hub. A few years ago, I had corresponded with Jason Bishop's relative, Carolyn Levesque of Arroyo Grande, who told me that he has always had some type of psychological problems, to put it mildly, probably from indoctrination from reading too many shaver mystery science fiction novels of the 1950s, which dealt with underground civilizations. Let's also talk about Thomas Edwin Costello. Of course, there are many persons with the same name. However, an alleged retired Air Force colonel who claimed that he was involved in Dulce claimed that there has never been a Thomas Edwin Costello that was ever employed as a security person in Dulce. The late Gabe Valdez also stated that there was never such a person connected to the alleged Dulce base. Now let's talk about Krista Tilton. Some researchers seem to say that she came to the scene slightly after Ann West. They say that Krista Tilton and Tom Adams were initially partners and that she was in touch with Myrna Hansen. According to Tim Beckley, Krista Tilton later on got together with Wendell Stevens. Krista Tilton was said to have distributed her manuscript, The Benowitz Papers. She claimed that she was in touch with Richard C. Doty, formerly with AFOSI at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. Krista Tilton was featured on a Japanese TV program about the Dulce base back in 1989 and 1990. Krista Tilton flew over the Archuleta Mesa and over Soldier Canyon with Junichi Yahweh of Nippon TV in 1989. She appeared on Japanese TV a couple of times and claimed to have taken a photo of a circular structure over Soldier Canyon, which is slightly southwest of Dulce. Tilton, in a manuscript, The Benowitz Papers, expressed her belief that the whole Thomas E. Costello story was a fabrication. Now, Ann West, in turn, reportedly claimed that Krista Tilton's information was nothing more than disinformation of the highest degree. Now, let's talk about Branton, also known as Bruce Walton, also known as Alan B. de Walton. Beginning in the 1990s, Branton compiled a book called The Dulce Book and also Dulce Wars. Walton allegedly got most of the information from Tal, some from John Lear and some from Val Valerian, also known as John Grace. Tal Levesque claimed that Bruce Walton was incarcerated in 2009 in Utah for felony charges. Now let's talk about the late Gabe Valdez. The late Gabe Valdez was a retired New Mexico State Patrol officer who was in charge of the Dulce area for many years, from the early 1970s to the late 1980s. He passed away on August 6, 2011 at his residence in Albuquerque. Valdez claimed that the government was most likely responsible for the cattle mutilations which started happening from around 1975. He claimed that the government may have begun to periodically monitor the radiation level of certain cattle some years later after the 1967 underground nuclear explosion, which was called Project Gas Buggy, which took place about 22 miles southwest of Dulce. Valdez also stated that the government staged several UFO incidents in the Dulce area by use of high-tech equipment such as prototypes of holographic image projections, as well as unmanned aerial vehicles on a remotely controlled platform that were made to resemble flying saucers. Valdez believed that the biowarfare experiments were conducted at Dulce and that the UFO alien stories were concocted by the government as a cover story to conceal various black projects in the area. Here's another photo of Gabe Valdez. Now, Gabe Valdez stated that all UFOs are man-made, to which I certainly disagree. Now, let's talk about the mysterious William Bill Moore. It was Moore who first propagated or revived the story about Roswell in 1980, when he, together with Charles Bulitz, published the book Incident at Roswell. Until this book came out, most Americans had no interest or knowledge about the Roswell incident, since it was long forgotten and dismissed as a misidentification by the U.S. Army in 1947. He claimed that around the same time that he began to propagate the Roswell story, he was working with Richard C. Doty of Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque and participated in a disinformation ploy to saturate Paul Bennewitz with false information on the Dulce base. Then he claimed in a 1989 MUFON conference that took place in Las Vegas, Nevada. However, there's no verifiable documentation whatsoever that Moore participated in such disinformation ploy in any official capacity, except for his verbal confession that he made at a 1989 MUFON conference in Las Vegas. Let's talk about Richard C. Doty. Initially with Kirtland Air Force Base, AFOSI, around 1979, 1980, and 1981 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He was not a high-ranking officer. He claimed that he participated in disinformation in official capacity along with Moore. Again, there's no documentation that he participated in such disinformation ploy at Kirtland Air Force Base, AFOSI, in any official capacity, even though Paul Bennewitz's name and Doty's name appear on one or two Kirtland OSI documents, because Kirtland Air Force Base invited Paul Bennewitz to testify to what he allegedly was seeing over the Manzano storage areas. Later on, Richard C. Doty became a promoter of the Serpo project, which some researchers seem to describe as being a total fabrication. Project Camelot seems to have bought Doty's story hook, line, and sinker. Now let's talk about Phil Schneider, finally. Phil Schneider was never a part of the initial Dulce base rumors. Apparently, he must have read many articles concerning the alleged Dulce base by the time he came out into the scene in 1995 and started giving lectures. It was only in 1989 that Bob Lazar first came out with the story that there was an altercation between the United States military and alien entities in an underground installation. Lazar never specified any location. Phil Schneider also heard about the Bob Lazar story. Apparently, knowing that no one had yet come up with any claim of personal involvement in the alleged 1979 altercation, he conveniently cast himself into the scene, claiming that he was a survivor of the Dulce Wars. For more information, or if you'd like to read the entire article, you can go to the link provided on this page called Enigmatic Personalities Behind the Initial Dulce Base Stories. This is Norio Hayakawa in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, USA.